My name is Maya, and at 28 years old I found myself standing on a patch of sidewalk that held more of my history than any other place on earth. My uncle, a man who measured love in square footage and affection in profit margins, thought he had inherited my grandmother's legacy when she passed away. He was wrong. He had inherited a building, a plot of land, a tangible asset he could liquidate. He never understood that my grandmother's true legacy wasn't something you could touch. He never thought to look up. And that single arrogant oversight, that failure to see beyond the dirt beneath his feet, was a mistake that would end up costing him millions and save my grandmother's soul. Before I tell you exactly how a forgotten clause in a will, a clause about the very air we breathe, brought a 40-story skyscraper to a grinding halt, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Go ahead and drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like your family saw you but never truly understood you, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And of course, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the end of this story. For me, it all started with the smell of cinnamon and melting butter. That was the scent of my childhood, the perfume of my grandmother, Elena. Her bakery, Elena's Hearth, wasn't just a business. It was the warm, beating heart of our little corner of downtown. It was a historic 3-story brick building, wedged between two glass and steel towers that had sprouted up over the years, making the hearth look like a stubborn, beloved old relative refusing to give in to the relentless march of time. The front window was a masterpiece of leaded glass that threw fractured rainbows across the worn wooden floors whenever the morning sun hit it just right. Inside, the air was always thick with the ghosts of a million happy memories and the tangible promise of fresh bread. My grandmother had started it with nothing but her parents' recipes and a loan she'd had to fight tooth and nail for. She'd laid the decorative tiles behind the counter herself, her knees raw and her back aching, her image reflected in each glossy, imperfect square. I spent every summer and most weekends of my childhood there. While other kids were at the pool, I was perched on a flour-dusted stool, my small hands struggling to knead a sticky ball of dough that seemed to have a life of its own. Grandma Elena would guide my fingers, her own hands gnarled with arthritis but still impossibly strong and gentle. "Patience, my little starling," she'd whisper, her voice as warm as the oven's. "You can't rush the bread. It has to breathe. It has to rest. Just like people." She called me her starling because she said I was small but had a song in my heart that was bigger than my body. We didn't just bake bread. We created comfort. We knew our customers by name, knew their stories, their joys, their griefs. Mrs. Gable always got a seeded rye on Tuesdays for her husband's lunch. Mr. Henderson, a widower, would come in every Sunday for a single pane o' chocolate, telling us it was the one thing that still tasted like his wedding anniversary. Elena's Hearth wasn't a transaction. It was a community. It was a living, breathing part of her and by extension a part of me. Then she was gone. The heart of our family stopped beating one quiet Tuesday morning. The grief was a thick, suffocating fog. The silence in her absence was louder than any noise I'd ever heard. The bakery closed its doors, a wreath of dried flowers hanging on the handle, and the vibrant pulse of downtown felt suddenly weaker, dimmer. My uncle, Richard, her only son, handled the arrangements. He was a successful property developer, a man who saw the world as a series of lots and blueprints. He was sharp, driven, and had a way of making you feel small and foolish for valuing anything that couldn't be appraised. During the week of the funeral, he was the picture of stoic grief, but I saw something else in his eyes when he looked at the bakery. Not sorrow but calculation. I knew with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he didn't see a legacy. He saw a gold mine. The dreaded family meeting happened 2 weeks after we laid my grandmother to rest. The air in my parents' formal living room was stale with unspoken tensions. Uncle Richard, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car, unrolled a set of architectural renderings across the coffee table with a dramatic flourish. My parents, who had always been slightly in awe of and intimidated by Richard's aggressive success, leaned forward with hungry eyes. I remained seated, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The drawings depicted a sleek, soulless tower of glass and steel, gleaming under an artist's perfect sun. At the bottom, in elegant, sharp font, were the words, "The Sterling Spire." "It's a 40-story luxury condominium," Richard announced, his voice booming with self-congratulation. "State-of-the-art amenities, rooftop infinity pool, panoramic city views. We're talking top-of-the-market pricing. This is how we honor Mom's hard work." by turning her little nest egg into true generational wealth. For all of us. He gestured magnanimously at my parents, who were already nodding, their faces flushed with the intoxicating vision of money they'd never had to earn. I felt a surge of nausea. Little nest egg? Generational wealth? He was talking about paving over paradise to put up a parking lot, or worse, a vertical palace for millionaires. No, the word escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was quiet, but in the reverent silence that had fallen over the room, it sounded like a gunshot. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to me. Richard's smile tightened into a mask of tolerant condescension. No? He repeated as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean, no, Maya? I took a breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I mean, you can't just tear it down. That place is, it's grandma. It's her entire life. She built that bakery with her own hands. People depend on it. It's a landmark. My voice trembled with a mixture of grief and fury. Richard let out a short, pitying laugh. He walked over and patted my shoulder in a way that was meant to be comforting but felt like a dismissal. Oh Maya. You're so sentimental. Sweet, it really is. But you have to understand, sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. Sentiment doesn't fund our retirement. Your grandmother was a very practical woman. She'd be thrilled to know her prime piece of real estate was finally living up to its full potential. Her potential wasn't about money, I retorted, shrugging off his hand. It was about community and kindness and making a place where people felt welcome. You want to replace that with a building most of her customers could never even afford to walk into. My father cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. My dear, Richard has a point. We have to be realistic. The building is old. The maintenance alone is, well, it's a lot. This would secure our future. My mother nodded in agreement. Your uncle has put a lot of thought into this. He knows what's best for the family. I looked from my mother's placating face to my father's averted eyes, and then to my uncle's smug, triumphant grin. In that moment I had never felt more alone. It was 3 against 1. The forces of practicality and greed against my solitary, sentimental heart. I was just the emotional granddaughter, the naive girl who didn't understand the way the real world worked. They had already decided. My memories didn't have a price tag, so they were worthless. The following week, we met with Mr. Evans, my grandmother's lawyer, for the reading of the will. His office was like him, old, dignified, and filled with the quiet scent of paper and leather. He was a man who seemed to belong to a more deliberate, thoughtful era. He wore a tweed jacket despite the warm weather and looked at us over a pair of half-moon glasses. My uncle sat forward in his chair, practically vibrating with anticipation. I sat back, numb, already knowing what was coming. Mr. Evans read the document in a dry, steady voice. There were some small bequests to distant relatives, a donation to the local library. My parents and I were left significant, but not life-changing, sums of money from her savings. And then came the final brutal clause. To my son Richard Sterling, Mr. Evans read, I bequeath the property located at 124 Chestnut Street, including the building and the land upon which it stands, in recognition of his business acumen and in the hope that he will use it to provide for the family's future. Richard's chest puffed out. He shot me a look that was a toxic cocktail of pity and triumph. He had won. Not only had he won, but my grandmother's own words seemed to sanction his vision. In recognition of his business acumen. The words were a knife in my heart. How could she have known him so little and me so little? I felt a fresh wave of grief, this time laced with the bitter sting of betrayal. It felt as if she too was on their side. I stumbled out of the lawyer's office in a daze, my uncle's voice echoing behind me as he excitedly discussed demolition permits with my father. I was defeated. Over the next few weeks I tried everything. I was a one-woman army fighting a war that had already been lost. I spent days in the city archives, compiling a history of the bakery, proving its significance to the downtown core's development. I put together a detailed business proposal, complete with financial projections, showing how Elena's hearth could be modernized and expanded, becoming even more profitable while retaining its historic character. I even started a petition online that gathered a few thousand signatures from locals who loved the bakery. I presented my meticulously researched folder to Richard over coffee. He didn't even open it. He pushed it back across the table to me. Maya, I appreciate the effort. I really do. It shows passion. But the time for passion is over. The time for business is now. The contracts are already being drafted. This is happening. I pleaded with my parents one last time, my voice cracking. Don't you remember what that place meant to her? To us? The Christmases we spent there icing cookies? The day I learned to braid a halal. My mother sighed, a long, weary sound. Of course we remember, honey. But memories don't keep the lights on. Richard is offering us security. Please, for our sake, don't make this any harder than it needs to be. I confided in my best friend, Chloe, over a tearful phone call. She was the only one who seemed to get it. He's a steamroller, Maya, she said, her voice fierce with indignation. He's a greedy, heartless bulldozer in $1,000 suit. But you have your grandmother's fire in you. I know you do. Don't let him extinguish it. But I felt like that fire was down to its last ember. The final blow came in the form of a large laminated sign zip-tied to the wrought iron fence in front of the bakery. Notice of demolition. The date was set for 2 weeks away. Seeing it in stark official letters made it real. It was no longer a threat. It was a death sentence. That night I went to the bakery one last time. I sat on the cold concrete steps, the same steps where I'd sat as a child eating a warm croissant, and I leaned my head against the heavy oak door. I pressed my palm against the cool wood, trying to feel some echo of the life that had pulsed within those walls for over 50 years. I tried to feel my grandmother. But all I felt was a hollow, aching emptiness. I cried until I had no tears left, my sobs absorbed by the silent, sleeping city. I had failed her. I had failed to protect the one thing she had loved most in the world. And as the moon rose high over the sterile glass towers that surrounded me, I finally, completely gave up. The days leading up to the demolition were a blur of numb resignation. My parents treated me with a gentle, cautious pity, as if I were a convalescent recovering from a long illness. They spoke in hushed tones about Maya's disappointment, and how I was finally coming to terms with reality. My uncle called once, his voice oozing a false, magnanimous sympathy. I know this is hard for you, kiddo, he'd said. But in a few years when you're cashing those dividend checks, you'll thank me. I hung up without replying. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. I focused on the one task left to me, packing up my grandmother's personal effects from her small apartment above the bakery, which, according to the will, were now mine. The apartment smelled of her, a faint, lingering scent of lavender and yeast. It was a place of quiet comfort, filled with old books, worn armchairs, and framed photographs of a smiling family that no longer felt like mine. I spent hours sifting through a lifetime of memories, each object a tiny pinprick to my already wounded heart. Tucked away in the back of her mahogany writing desk, I found a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was a box I recognized from my childhood. She used to keep her special buttons in it. It was locked. I almost set it aside, but something made me run my fingers over the lid. There, carved into the wood so finely it was almost invisible, was a tiny starling. My heart skipped a beat. After a frantic search, I found the key taped to the underside of the desk drawer. It was a small, ornate brass key. With trembling hands, I fitted it into the lock and turned. The lid sprang open with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was not a collection of buttons, but another, even smaller key, this one modern and metallic, like one for a safe deposit box. Beneath it lay a single folded piece of thick, creamy stationery. I unfolded it. My grandmother's familiar, elegant script filled the page. For my little starling, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone and you are feeling lost. It means my son has likely chosen the path of a wolf instead of the path of a shepherd. Do not despair. You have more strength than you know. Take this key to Mr. Evans. Trust him completely. He holds the rest of the song. All my love, your Grandma Elena. The rest of the song. A wave of adrenaline, sharp and clean, cut through the fog of my grief. It wasn't over. My grandmother had left me a message, a secret. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, began to flicker back to life inside me. The next morning I called Mr. Evans's office. His secretary was surprised to hear from me but scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. I walked into his office feeling like a different person. The despair was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now overlaid with a new, thrumming sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was a messenger on a secret mission from the past. I sat across the large mahogany desk from him and without a word, slid the note and the small key across its polished surface. Mr. Evans picked up the note and read it. A slow, knowing smile spread across his kindly face. He looked at me over his glasses, his eyes twinkling. "Ah," he said, his voice soft. "She called you her starling. I wondered when you would arrive. I've been waiting for you, Maya." He rose from his chair and walked over to a large, formidable-looking safe disguised as a wooden filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He spun the dial with a series of practiced clicks, pulled the heavy door open, and retrieved a large, sealed manila envelope. It was thick and heavy, and on the front, in my grandmother's handwriting, was my name, Maya. He placed it on the desk in front of me. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said, resuming his seat. "She was not just a baker. She was one of the shrewdest businesspeople I have ever had the privilege of representing. She loved your uncle, her son, very much. But she was not blind. She knew his character down to the last dollar sign. She knew that one day he would see her life's work not as a legacy to be preserved, but as an asset to be liquidated." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "She came to me about 10 years ago after Richard tried to convince her to sell the bakery to a hotel conglomerate. He was relentless and it broke her heart. He saw the future. She knew what would happen after she was gone. So we made a plan. A plan to protect the soul of Elena's hearth, even if its body could not be saved." He gestured to the envelope. "Go on. Open it." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely break the seal. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a legal document titled, "Codicil to the Last Will and Testament of Elena Sterling." The second was a property deed, stamped and notarized by the city. I scanned the dense legal language, my eyes searching for meaning. Then I saw it. A paragraph that made my breath catch in my throat. It stated, in unequivocal terms, that the bequest of the property at 124 Chestnut Street to her son, Richard Sterling, was for the land and the existing structure only. A second clause, the one I was now holding, was to be unsealed upon her death. It explicitly and irrevocably bequeathed a separate, legally severed asset to her granddaughter, Maya. Mr. Evans tapped the deed with his finger. "It's a bit of an esoteric area of property law, but perfectly valid. It's called superjacent rights. Most people call them air rights. Years ago, your grandmother had the legal title to the vertical space above her property severed from the title to the land itself. The dividing line is the roofline of the original one-story bakery foundation." He let that sink in before continuing. "Your uncle Maya owns the dirt. He owns the footprint of the building. He can, if he wishes, build a lovely one-story structure on that foundation. But he cannot build a single inch higher. Not one floor. Not one brick. Because you, my dear, own the sky." I looked from the papers to his face, my mind struggling to comprehend the beautiful, brilliant simplicity of it. My grandmother hadn't betrayed me. She had armed me. She had seen this entire battle playing out years in advance and had forged the perfect weapon for me to win it. It was a plan born of love, foresight, and a profound understanding of her son's single-minded greed. A vivid memory surfaced so clear it felt like I was there. I was about 16, complaining to my grandmother about some high school drama. She was shaping loaves of sourdough, her movements rhythmic and sure. "Some people, my starling," she'd said, dusting flour from her hands, "only look down. They see the dirt, the stones, the pavement. They look for things to own. But the smart ones, the ones with real vision, they remember to look up. They see the sky. You can't own the sky, but you can have all of it." She hadn't just been talking about philosophy. She had been telling me her secret. A slow, cold wave of calm washed over me, extinguishing the last of my frantic despair. This was no longer about stopping a demolition. It was about fulfilling a final wish. It was about honoring a love so profound it had reached across time and death to protect me. Mr. Evans seemed to read my mind. "Her instructions were very clear," he said gently. "She wanted you to wait. Let him declare his intentions. Let him put his own greed on public display. Let him swing the wrecking ball. His defeat will be more complete and your position will be unassailable." The waiting was the hardest part. I watched from my apartment window across the street as the demolition crews arrived. I watched them erect scaffolding and gut the interior. My parents called, expressing their relief that I was finally being sensible. Each word was a small twist of a knife, but it only hardened my resolve. The day the wrecking ball hit the beautiful brick facade, I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just stood at my window, my hand resting on the envelope on my desk, and I waited. I let them tear down the body because I knew with every fiber of my being that my grandmother had entrusted me with its soul. The day after the demolition was grim. Where Elena's hearth had stood for half a century, there was now a gaping wound in the city block, a chaotic landscape of rubble, twisted metal, and pulverized brick. The air, which for my entire life had smelled of sugar and yeast, now tasted of dust and finality. A sense of violation hung over the street. But my Uncle Richard saw none of that. He stood on the edge of the flattened lot, his hands on his hips, a broad, triumphant smile plastered on his face. He was wearing a hard hat that looked brand new and a fluorescent yellow vest over his expensive shirt. He looked like a king surveying a newly conquered territory. Construction crews were already at work, clearing the last of the debris and setting up the wooden forms for the foundation of his monstrous sterling spire. He was talking to a foreman, pointing at a set of rolled-up blueprints he held like a royal scepter. He was the picture of a man who had gotten everything he wanted. That was the moment I chose to arrive. I wasn't the grieving, defeated girl he had last seen. I had spent the morning choosing my armor. A sharply tailored navy blue blazer, dark trousers, and low heels that made a firm, deliberate click on the pavement. My hair was pulled back in a severe, professional bun. Beside me, carrying a polished leather briefcase, was Mr. Evans, a calming, solid presence in his timeless tweed jacket. We walked towards the construction site entrance. Richard spotted us. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark scowl of annoyance. He strode over to us, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Maya? What in the world are you doing here?" he barked, his voice dripping with irritation. "This is an active construction site. It's dangerous. And you brought a lawyer." He let out a disbelieving, humorless laugh. "Oh, don't tell me. You're going to try and serve me with some last-ditch, frivolous lawsuit based on feelings. It's too late, you see." He gestured dramatically at the flattened earth behind him. "The bakery is gone. It's over. Go home." I met his condescending gaze without flinching. My heart was pounding, a wild drum against my ribs, but my voice when I spoke was as calm and cool as the morning air. "Good morning, Uncle Richard. You're right, the bakery is gone. I'm not here to talk about the building that was. I'm here to talk about the building that will be." I paused for a beat, letting the words hang in the air. Or rather, the building that won't be. Richard's face contorted in a mask of confusion and anger. "What are you talking about? Are you delusional? The permits are approved. The funding is secured. The foundation for a 40-story tower is being laid as we speak. The Sterling Spire is happening." "Ah, the Sterling Spire," I said, nodding slowly. "A very tall building. And that's the problem." I looked him directly in the eye. "You inherited the building, Uncle. And the land it stood on. Grandma was very clear about that in her will." His smugness began to return. "Exactly. So what's your point?" "My point," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "is that you should have listened more carefully when Grandma told you stories. You should have paid attention to what she valued. She was also very specific about what she left to me." At that cue, Mr. Evans stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and produced a thick, crisp folder. He held it out to Richard. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his tone polite but firm. "This is a certified copy of a second codicil to your mother's last will and testament, along with a duly registered and executed property deed filed with the city registrar 10 years ago. I strongly suggest you and your legal counsel review it." Richard snatched the folder from his hand, his movements jerky with impatience. "This is ridiculous. More sentimental nonsense." He ripped it open and began to read. I watched his face. It was like watching a fast-motion film of a building collapsing. First there was arrogant dismissal. Then his eyes narrowed in confusion as he scanned the legal jargon. Then they widened in dawning comprehension. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen. The smug confidence that was as much a part of him as his expensive watch evaporated into the dusty air. His mouth fell slightly open. He looked up from the paper, his gaze darting wildly from me to Mr. Evans and back again, his eyes filled with pure, unadulterated disbelief. "Air rights," he sputtered, the words barely a whisper. He shook his head as if to clear it. What is this? This is some kind of joke. This can't be legal. Mr. Evans's expression remained placid. I assure you, Mr. Sterling, it is 100% unequivocally legal. A bit obscure perhaps, but ironclad. As I said, the deed was registered a decade ago. It has been a matter of public record for anyone who cared to perform a thorough title search. Your mother, in her infinite wisdom, severed the superjacent rights from the terrestrial rights. In layman's terms, she split the sky from the land. The foreman and a few of the nearby workers had stopped what they were doing, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. They were watching us, their expressions a mixture of confusion and amusement. Richard's humiliation was becoming a public spectacle. He looked down at the blueprints in his other hand, the grand design for his 40-story monument to himself. Then he looked up at the vast empty blue sky that hung over his worthless one-story foundation. The blueprints trembled, the paper crinkling in his white-knuckled grip. Miss Maya Sterling, Mr. Evans continued, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, is the sole and legal owner of the space beginning at the 16-foot mark, the height of the original bakery's roofline, extending upwards in perpetuity. So by all means keep your foundation. Build your one-story building. But you will not build a single floor higher. You will not add a single window or flagpole that infringes upon her property without her express written permission. I took a step closer to my uncle. He smelled of expensive cologne and panicked sweat. I lowered my voice so only he could hear it. Grandma always told me that the most important ingredient in anything you build is love, not money. She knew you'd try to erase her. But you can't erase her, Uncle Richard. You can't. Then I raised my voice again for the benefit of his audience. You can have the dirt. I'll keep her legacy. I turned my back on him then, on his ashen face and his shattered dreams. As Mr. Evans and I walked calmly away from the rubble of his ambition, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of his stunned, impotent fury behind me. For the first time since my grandmother had died, the air felt clear and I could finally breathe. The immediate aftermath was a symphony of Richard's impotent rage. My phone began to ring before Mr. Evans and I had even reached the end of the block. I ignored the first call. And the second. By the time I was back in my apartment, I had a string of irate, increasingly desperate voicemails. The first was pure blustering threat. Maya, you call me back right now. You have no idea what you're doing. My lawyers will tear this ridiculous claim to shreds. The next one was tinged with panic. Hey Maya, I've had my people look at this. This is insane. You can't do this. I have millions tied up in this project. Millions. You're going to bankrupt me. The last one was an attempt at emotional manipulation, a tool he hadn't sharpened in years. You're destroying this family, Maya. All for some misplaced, childish sentimentality. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. Each message, instead of intimidating me, acted like a booster shot of strength. His panic was the confirmation of my power. His anger was the proof of my victory. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated his mother. And now the bill for that arrogance was coming due. Next he turned his sights on my parents. Predictably, they called me, their voices a frantic duet of confusion and accusation. Maya, what have you done? My mother cried into the phone. Richard just called. He was screaming. He said you're holding the entire project hostage over some legal trick. I took a deep breath, picturing my grandmother standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder. The old Maya would have crumbled, would have tried to explain, to justify, to apologize. But that Maya was gone, buried in the rubble of the bakery. I'm not holding anything hostage, Mom, I said, my voice steady. I am executing the final, true wishes of my grandmother's will. The will that both of you chose to ignore in favor of Uncle Richard's promises of easy money. But the money, Maya. The family's future. My father interjected. Grandma's legacy was never about a bank account, I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. It was about integrity. I'm sorry you and Dad don't see that. I have to go now. I ended the call, leaving them in a stunned silence. For the first time in my life I had set a boundary. I had refused to absorb their anxiety or bend to their pressure. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once. For a week there was silence. A tense, heavy quiet. I knew Richard was scrambling, consulting with teams of high-priced lawyers, looking for a loophole, a weakness, any crack in the legal fortress my grandmother and Mr. Evans had built. He found nothing. The second call from him came exactly 1 week after the confrontation. His tone was completely different. The blustering rage was gone, replaced by a strained, artificial civility that was far more unnerving. "Why? We need to talk," he said. "Just you and me. No lawyers. Let me buy you lunch." We met at a neutral restaurant, a sterile place with no memories attached. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the confident swagger he always carried himself with was gone. He looked smaller, diminished. He spent 20 minutes explaining the financial hole he was in. The contracts he'd signed with architects, with suppliers, the deposits he'd paid. He was trying to make me feel guilty, to make me feel responsible for his predicament. I just listened, sipping my water, saying nothing. Finally he got to the point. He slid a checkbook onto the table. "Look," he said, his voice a low plea. "Name your price. I'll buy the air rights from you. What do you want? 200,000? 3. It was an insultingly low number, a fraction of what they were worth. A last-ditch attempt to see if I was as naive as he'd always believed. I looked at the checkbook, then back at his desperate face. And I smiled. A small, sad smile. "You still don't get it, do you, Uncle Richard?" I said softly. "This was never about money. The air above that land is not for sale." I stood up, leaving my untouched lunch on the table. "When you're ready to have a real conversation about Grandma's legacy, you know how to reach me." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving him sitting there staring at his useless checkbook. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. He was no longer the king. He was the supplicant. And he was finally, painfully beginning to understand that he was completely and utterly at my mercy. The real negotiations began a month later. They were not conducted over lunch or frantic phone calls, but in the quiet, dignified space of Mr. Evans's office. Richard arrived with his lead counsel, a sharp woman in a pinstripe suit who looked perpetually annoyed. He had aged a decade. The ordeal had stripped him of his bluster, leaving behind a tired, resentful man cornered by his own ambition. He came prepared with financial offers, complex proposals for profit-sharing, partnership stakes. He tried to appeal to my sense of family, to logic, to greed, every tool in his arsenal. I refused them all. With Mr. Evans's calm guidance, I held firm to my one non-negotiable position. "My grandmother's legacy is not a line item on a balance sheet," I repeated in various forms throughout the long, grueling meetings. "You want to build your tower in her sky? Then it will be a monument to her, not to you." The final agreement was not a contract of sale, but a covenant of principle. It was a masterpiece of moral victory, drafted by Mr. Evans and signed by a reluctant, defeated Richard Sterling. I agreed to lease him the air rights for the symbolic sum of $1 per year. But the conditions attached to that lease were ironclad. First, the 40-story building would not be called the Sterling Spire. It would be officially and permanently named the Elena Tower. His dream of putting his own name on the city skyline was dead. Second, the entire ground floor retail space, the most valuable commercial real estate in the building, was to be deeded free and clear to a charitable trust that I would control. That space would be used to create a new state-of-the-art community culinary institute. It would offer free vocational training and classes to underprivileged youth and aspiring bakers from across the city. Its name, of course, would be Elena's Hearth. Third, a large bronze plaque was to be designed and installed in the center of the main lobby, detailing the life of Elena Sterling and the 50-year history of the original bakery that had stood on that spot. Her story would be the first thing every resident and visitor saw when they entered the building. Richard fought it, naturally. His lawyer argued that the conditions were commercially unreasonable, that they were punitive. But they had no leverage. It was my sky and these were my terms. In the end, faced with total financial ruin, he signed. The project moved forward, but its soul had been completely rewritten. He would get his high-rise and he would make his money. But every time he looked at it, he would see his mother's name, not his own. Every time he walked through the lobby, he would be confronted with her story. And every day, the scent of baking bread would once again fill the air on that corner, a constant living reminder of the legacy he had tried and failed to destroy. 2 years later, I stood inside the new Elena's Hearth for its grand opening. The space was beautiful, all warm woods, gleaming stainless steel, and walls of glass that looked out onto the bustling street. It was filled with the sounds of laughter and excited chatter, and most importantly with that familiar, beloved scent of cinnamon and melting butter. Young students in crisp white aprons were pulling trays of golden brown croissants from the ovens, their faces glowing with pride. In the corner, a group of neighborhood kids were messily but joyfully decorating cupcakes. My grandmother's spirit was alive here, more vibrant than ever. My parents were there, standing off to the side. They had apologized, a clumsy and heartfelt admission of their own short-sightedness. Our relationship was still healing, but for the first time in years, it felt honest. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a pride I hadn't seen since I was a little girl. "She would have loved this, Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what she meant." I saw Uncle Richard too. He stood near the entrance, half hidden behind a large potted plant, observing the scene. He looked older, more somber. He caught my eye, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something in his expression that wasn't anger or resentment. It might have been regret. It might have even been a sliver of understanding. He gave me a short, almost imperceptible nod and then slipped out the door. He had his tower of glass and steel, but I had this. I had the warmth, the life, the legacy. I had one. Looking around at the vibrant, joyful community filling the room, I finally understood the true nature of what my grandmother had left me. It was so much more than a legal document or a clever bit of foresight. She hadn't just left me the air rights. She had left me her backbone. She had left me a mission. She had shown me that some things, memory, love, community, a warm loaf of bread shared with a neighbor, have a value that can never be appraised, demolished, or outbid. My name is Maya, and I learned that the most powerful legacies are not built of brick and mortar, but of the intangible things that truly allow us to touch the sky. What my uncle never grasped is that you can own a piece of the world, but it's what you give back to it that defines your worth. Have you ever had to fight for something that everyone else told you was worthless? Share your story in the comments below. I'd be honored to read it. And please, don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember that your own worth is not determined by those who underestimate you. Sometimes, their disbelief is the greatest gift they can give you, because it forces you to find a strength you never knew you had. Thank you for joining me.